and a very warm welcome to this month's Pacecast. I'm Anita Pace. Thank you for joining us. I've interviewed some very interesting business leaders and it's been a privilege, but I don't think I've ever interviewed anybody who's experienced fires, explosions and earthquakes. And apparently our guest today has. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about that and his journey and his career. My guest today is the Chief Executive Officer of the independent power company Triton Power. It's a very warm welcome to Mick Farr. Hello.
Yeah, good morning, Anita. Nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me along.
It's a privilege to have you here, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend it with us.
Looking forward to it.
So, as we always do with our guests, we've asked Mick to bring in something that's, I'm intrigued as to what it is, that's meaningful to him. So, what is it and why have you brought it in?
So this was a gift given to me when I left a power plant when I was working in the Republic of Turkey. And I kind of explain, it's kept in my office. It reminds me of an event that occurred in 1999, actually. So maybe I'll kind of give you a feel for this. So power plants, and certainly the power plants I've worked at and, spent my career in, are big, heavy duty machines, and they're rotating at 3,000 revolutions per minute, which is, the grid frequency. And I was actually working on shift in the middle of the night, and I was in the turbine hall, and all of a sudden the building started to shake, and I thought the machine had failed in a catastrophic way, and the machine had gone into an unbalance, and the machines were shaking the building. So
You thought it was the machine shaking?
I thought it was a machine failure, yeah. Right. So I used my radio to the control room and instructed the guys in the control room to hit the emergency trip button. And that's what this object is. It's a emergency trip button. Every power station has an emergency trip button to make sure you can shut down safely to interrupt the energy input. And of course, once they did that, the building did not stop shaking, and so I ran outside thinking the building was going to collapse. And when I got outside, I saw everything else shaking as well, and it was one of the biggest earthquakes that hit Turkey in the last 50 years. In fact, it killed about 17,000 people, injured 50,000. And interestingly, on my drive home that morning, I passed buildings that had collapsed and buildings that were standing, and it was actually a pretty, really shaky moment in your life. But the reason, the trip button is here is about 6 months later, because it was an independent power company. It was one of the first in Turkey. The rest of them were owned by the state. We got a letter saying that my actions on that day had caused the grid to black out in Istanbul, and we were at fault, and I was at fault. So clearly it was the earthquake that caused the blackout, not me hitting the trip button or telling the guys to hit the trip button. And eventually it was dropped. But as a joke, when I was leaving, they presented me with this gift. And there's a little placard on there that says, "Ditch everything on realising earthquake, Mick." And it reminds me of that day, which I don't know if you've never experienced an earthquake. They are pretty frightening. But
there's
a story behind it.
I can't imagine. Obviously, you survived. Was anybody at the power station affected then?
No, apparently, everyone at the power plant was good. No issues there. And in fact, when it was built, it was what's called seismically qualified, which means the foundations dug down to bedrock, and actually it survived without any damage. So it was built properly, thankfully. Yeah. And then later that day, it managed to start up again and restore power. So. And
is that the only earthquake you've experienced then?
That's the only earthquake,
right. Okay.
Yes.
Right, good. We've established that. Well, thank you for bringing that in and sharing the story. So let's go right back to the beginning then. Young Mick, tell us a bit about that and your upbringing.
So, again, how did I start in the power industry? I think I was at school. I was always kind of interested in mechanical and how things worked, and I used to, when you'd finished playing with a toy or an item, I used to kind of take it to bits to see how it was made and constructed and stuff. So I was always interested. And my dad was, I'd say my dad was a proper craftsman. He spent a lot of time in the garage and shed making stuff, modernising, helping others out with his tools. He worked with his hands. And I always liked sciences and things like that. So I ended up, being focused on that. I got to school, but I was in a terrible school. I think thankfully it's pretty good now, but when I was there, it was an awful place.
Is this over in West Yorkshire?
It was in Wakefield in West Yorkshire. Really, I would say what would be today called a failing school.
Right.
But thankfully, I managed to kind of focus on a couple of things, which was, physics, chemistry, science and maths. And I was like, I didn't, stay on to go to university. I left school at 16. And I really just applied for every apprenticeship going at the time. It was British Telecom at the time, the Yorkshire Electricity Board, which was nationalised at the time, British Gas at the time, and then the last one was the CEGB, which was the Central Electricity Generating Board, which owned and ran all the power plants in the country at that time. And I got offered 3 of the 4 apprenticeships. It was really a bit of a decision on what to do then and which one to take. And anyway, I decided the power station route was for me. It was, bigger assets. There was lots of them around the country. I thought that'll be more interesting. And so I started an apprenticeship at 16 and...
Doing what? What did a day look like?
So they had 3 different skills and it was called a craft apprenticeship. And there was 3 different skill areas. One was mechanical, one was electrical, and the one that I chose was instrumentation and controls, which is really the heart and the brains of how the control functions of a process plant work. So my training, took me to college. I went to Newcastle. I went to Harrogate. Very, very rigorous and expensive, formal apprenticeship program, which I'm proud of today. It was a fantastic start to a career. And, we as Triton Power now actually have our own apprenticeship program. And, I think in today's modern world, you can actually get paid for learning. You finish your apprenticeship without any debt. The company's got someone that's fully trained. They've invested a lot of money, of course, but, growing your own talent, I think we maybe end up touching on that maybe later. But, yeah, that's how I started. But interestingly, when I finished my apprenticeship, I got a job.
And how long was your apprenticeship?
It was for 4 years.
Right.
When I finished my apprenticeship, you needed to apply for a job and where the roles would be. And the first role was working in Leeds at a coal-fired power station in Leeds. It's actually a place called Skelton Grange, and there's actually a waste-to-energy plant on that site today. But I got a job there, and interestingly, it was a very heavily unionised. This is a kind of key moment in my career. Very unionised environment, a bit like, the National Coal Board. I don't know if people remember Arthur Scargill, but he was a guy back when I was young and heavily unionised. So the first thing I was asked to do as soon as I got a job was join the pension scheme and join the union, and I did both.
And you didn't think twice about it at that?
Never even thought.
Yeah.
I mean, one of them was definitely good, joining the pension scheme. My gosh, kind of, live the benefits of that today. But the other one was joining the union, and, I listened to the old shop stewards and representatives, and I thought, God, these guys are making a lot of sense, I think you're young at, 20 years old. I think you think about social type stuff quite a lot. And I thought, I used to buy the Daily Mirror on the way to work, put it in my pocket and read it at lunchtime, that kind of thing. So there was one guy decided to not become the union rep anymore. So I decided, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to sit and I'm going to tell the management how we need to run this power plant. And I started going to meetings and, interacting more with how the coal plant was run and what the management team were saying. And I started to think, actually, these guys have got a point about competitive environment. The industry had privatized around that time. And I was actually thinking, we're going to have to make some changes if this plant's going to survive. And so the more and more I went to meetings, the more and more I understood a bit about what competitive pressures bring to business. And I started going back into the workshop and explaining this to my colleagues and who I was representing, and they were like, no, we don't want any of that. We just want this place to shut so we can get the redundancy payments. And I'm like, no, I can't do that, because that would affect me as well. So we need to do something about it. And then, so the way it worked was they kind of got increasingly frustrated with my views. And I just said, look, guys, I think if you don't think I'm doing this right, then you need to have a vote of confidence in what I'm doing or not. And actually, they had a vote of confidence. And I think I remember the results. It's something like 13-9 as me kind of not doing what they wanted. So in effect, the thumbs down were 13 and the thumbs up were 9. And that was a kind of a pivotal moment for me, because I realised, actually, I need to be concentrating on the management side of business.
And how old were you then?
I think I was about 22.
Wow. So you were
22.
the union rep at quite a young age then.
Very
with that
young,
responsibility.
very young. Normally, and I think to some extent, no one else wanted to do it, right? But I think that's probably a message in itself. And that was, I realised, and I came home that day and I said to my dad, I can't believe it. They've had a vote of no confidence in me, Dad, and which I triggered, saying, hey, I need to know if I've got support here. And they voted me out, so I've resigned. And he just said, take care of yourself, son. Look after your own career, not somebody else's.
But you had some really valuable exposure to the business side of the operation, didn't you, by going to those meetings?
I did.
And it triggered something in you.
It did.
And if you hadn't, that, like you said, a pivotal moment, because if that hadn't happened, you might not be doing what you're doing today.
That's right. So that then spurred me on then to do more, about career, about how business works, and really then using your skills. So then, over time, I've worked in a few different countries now, and
to talk about that, which countries?
So, so the privatisation of the electricity industry occurred. It was called the Dash for Gas in the early 90s. I then moved, I actually relocated, and I think that's the biggest step, I would say, for most people. When you actually move from your hometown, and I actually broke the bonds of friendships, and I kind of figured for career, progression, I really needed to move. So I moved from West Yorkshire to actually South Humberside to Killingham, which is, not far from Grimsby. So actually pretty much full circle I ended up doing. But so I went there. It was a brand new build power plant. I was part of a handful selection of people that were recruited to build that in the early privatised days. And it was a bit of a different role. I went from maintenance then to operations. I was part of the operations team. Plant got running, plant made a lot of money. And then it was the privatised industry had businesses overseas. So after there was an opening coming up for this job in Turkey, not far from Istanbul. Again, building something new, getting it running, and then getting it working. So I joined the team there, and it was a promotional step. I became a shift manager. So I went from maintenance to operations and to a shift manager's position. So I had a team of Turkish nationals working in, fundamentally a Muslim country.
Didn't speak the language.
Didn't speak the language. I had a few lessons in Turkish. I still know a couple, of words. But so, that was a big adjustment going, but the key point is actually moving from your hometown and then moving, somewhere different the step then to working overseas didn't seem as big.
Because you'd already cut the cord.
Because I'd already cut the cords back home, so then I went and spent, it's almost 2.5 years in Turkey, working on this new build. Yeah, what an experience that was. Met some close friends out there that I'm still friends with today. And yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. But
had an earthquake.
It became more and more like, hey, I need to do something different now. And at the same time, the company was building a big fleet in the United States. So a guy asked me in the United States if I'd go out and spend some, help them in the build of the construction. And I actually moved from Turkey to Texas, in a place, in between Fort Worth and Dallas. So I went from a Muslim country to what was a Southern Baptist area of Christian Baptists. So it was like the religious contrast was huge. But the United States is a fantastic place. I thoroughly enjoyed my time, and I was working as an expat in Texas for 6 years. Made some great friends there as well. So yeah, what a, and ultimately met my wife that I'm married to today. Kind of a interesting story. I used to exercise quite a lot. Texas is a great place, and I was running around the lake, and I bumped into a friend, and she was with the friend, and so yeah.
The rest is history.
20 years later, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, what I would say is that working in the power sector gives you the opportunity to move around, different places. The skills, the people are smaller than you think. You bumped into people along the way. It's always interesting. Really fascinating to work in process plant where you've got risks that and have to be managed and people have to commit. So
I said at the top of the show, we talked about the earthquake, and that was a coincidence. I didn't know that was going to be related to the object you brought in. But fires and explosions, are they just commonplace then in the industry? I
wouldn't say common, no. But I think over 40 years, even, rare events I've seen. I've seen a hydrogen fire, I've seen a coal fire, I've seen a couple of explosions, I've seen some injuries and some damage in places as well. There was one in Turkey when I was there. A guy, when it was being built, the vendor who was building the plant, he'd not isolated something electrically that he should have done, and a guy got badly burnt, which is it's pretty bad.
Yeah, I can imagine. So America. So what happened? What brought you back to the UK? You were obviously having a great time in Texas.
Yeah, I think I needed to reconnect to my older kids who were then back in the UK. They were growing up, and I figured I needed to really, make sure that I didn't stay away for too long. There was an opportunity. I was asked to come back to the UK as well, so it kind of worked out. And then I moved to Chester. We've got currently Triton Power as an asset over in North Wales. So I moved back to Chester. I was then promoted to the production manager of the power plant at that point. One thing I noticed then when I came back, I like living and working in Texas, where it's very, I would say, dynamic business. In the United States, some states have what's called a right to employ law, and that means there are no employment contracts. There's no guarantees to a job. You don't get rights as such, other than the statutory stuff. So you can get hired and fired at really easily. And I came back and realised that this power plant, in North Wales was overstaffed, and it got, it was in a comfortable rut, and I'd say had grown a bit too fat. So I think the first job I really needed to do is to thin it out a bit and, by doing that, I needed to make it a bit more lean and a bit more efficient. That kind of behaviour of working in the United States had given me a bit of a more of a willingness to do that. But I think going back, understanding business and management from when I flipped from union to thinking, probably just reinforce that, and actually got rid of a couple of people, made a couple of people redundant. And what I found was, actually in an organisation, if there's always some people that don't pull the weight or are slacking more than others, and then they rely on others to do the work for them, particularly if you've got shift teams, like there's certain tasks and requirements to perform. If the night shift doesn't do them, then the day shift gets those jobs. And you got this, if you've got one slacker or someone that's not doing enough work, the following shift would get it, and that would irritate them. And ultimately, you end up with negative, views across the group of people because management aren't doing their job. And when I got back from the United States, I was, okay, like, we need to shake this place up a bit. And I really started, I really, took a couple of people out, made a couple of people redundant. But actually in doing so, the entire team, the rest of the team that were committed, the morale, the incentive all increased as a result.
Because people know, don't they? They know if people are
people
pulling
do.
the weight.
I mean, and I think they get frustrated at management that don't act.
Yeah.
And actually, that's one of my kind of guides. Businesses fail slow, but it's always management's fault, in my view. And my kind of views on this are: it's either management don't address the market's moved and management have not responded, or companies have not invested at the right time, so that's really a management decision, or management have not got people to do what people should be doing. So those three kind of golden rules for me: keep your eye on the market, invest at the right time, and get people to do the right thing, are the ones that ultimately will make a business more competitive, make it more profitable, make it robust enough to survive. So that then led me on to probably the biggest challenge I've had, was when I moved from that power plant, which was gas-fired, to one in the Midlands near Birmingham, a place called Rugeley. And I was there as a production manager for 6 years, managing a much bigger team, heavily unionised, and trying to shake that tree up was a lot more difficult.
Because of the strength of the union, or?
A bit of both. Much more, I'd say, wily old characters that know how to play the game. But I did manage to weed out the bad guys there as well. First time anyone had been sacked at that power plant in 40 years.
Wow. Well, that says a lot.
But again, same thing happened. By actually getting it and doing it, made a big difference. But yeah, I can't really go into too much detail about that because the circumstances of it are probably confidential in some ways. But big change, that one. And tough. It was a tough job.
Yeah. Well, they all sound to have been quite challenging. So Birmingham, and then from Birmingham you came back here, is that right? To this area?
Yeah. So then, there was an opening, an opportunity at the Salt End Power Plant, which is, located on the east side of Hull, where we provide steam and power to the chemicals park. It's the big blue building at Salt End where you see what people locally know as BP chemicals, even though BP are not there anymore.
Still call that though, isn't it?
People do, So then there was an opening there, and I came as a plant manager there sort of 12, 13 years ago, and I've been there since. So really I've kind of settled my roots down now in this area, which, when I went from Texas to Chester, people in Texas going, "You're going where?" when I went from Chester to Birmingham, people in Chester would say, "You're leaving Chester to go to Birmingham. Why are you doing that?" And then when I got to Birmingham, I'm saying I'm off to Hull. They'd go, "You're leaving Birmingham to go to Hull. Why are you doing that?" So, but actually, I think no matter where you go, there's always nice places to be, and that's exactly what I found by moving, and that's, you know, moving and relocating and, you know, breaking the ties which go back many years, I think are one of the keys for people that if they want to get on and they want to move and motivate, that's what I would advocate.
It's putting yourself out your comfort zone, isn't it? Because it's easy to stay put. Yeah. So you've been here quite a while now, so this area is now home. East Yorkshire's home, hopefully, for a bit longer.
It is. No, I mean, I think that's, you know, I think ultimately you have to sell, you know, and, you know, I think now, I think it's a little bit different to how it was back then, but, you know, I think when you've got kids and, you know, you're trying to get them through school and you're trying to motivate them in the right way, and you end up, you know, with friends and family and connections and stuff. And yeah, I can see this, you know, I can't see myself moving here. I mean, I might go back to the United States for holidays and bits, but, you know, I like traveling.
There is that connection with
I mean, I think that, you know, so working, you know, as an expat, it gives you benefits where you can travel on business expenses and, you know, you see a bit of the world in different ways. And yeah, that's what I did by, you know, seeing a lot of things, been a lot of places.
Yeah.
And really the company paid, right, in many ways, yeah.
Good way to see the world. So you touched on briefly there about Triton Power. So for the listeners who perhaps don't know what Triton Power is and what you guys do you want to just give us a quick overview? Yeah,
so Triton Power is an independent generator. We provide wholesale power to the grid operator and national grid. We also provide grid services by managing voltage and creating inertia, which keeps the system in the UK stable. We also provide at Saltend Chemicals Park steam for some of the, you know, key blue chip companies in this area like Ineos and Mitsubishi Chemicals. Vivergo make biofuels for cars and things. So it's an industrial process, but yeah, it's operator of, you know, kind of key services to the national grid. So we make electricity as well, quite a lot of electricity, and I think this is where we're seeing a bit of a big transition going on now, you know, to clean power and how we're moving from, you know, emissions of carbon to a lower carbon future, which is clearly important. You know, we've got a duty, you know, I think everyone's got a duty to try and, you know, look after the planet for future generations. I think what I want to see, though, I want to see that transition done securely and safely. I think there are some people they want to do it way more urgent than, you know, resources will allow. And, you know, we've got to make sure that we look after people that can't always convert easily. I mean, we've like most people in this country have got the heating is gas fired. The investments needed to make that, you know, emission free are very significant for a lot of people. So what I want to see is I want to see a really steady, structured, secure way of moving. And I don't think everyone sees it that way. I think my kind of future role, my view is to, you know, get some realistic thinking around that, which is more focused on engineering capabilities, construction requirements, rather than someone just thinking it's possible because someone said so. You've got to really put the dreams and thoughts and aspirations into real plans. And I want to see some credible plans so people can actually get on board and deliver things in a structured and pragmatic way. So I think that's really where my kind of future focus, you know, will end up being. You know, whilst I run a power company, you know, I'd like to see, you know, some strategic thinking. In fact, only, you know, a couple of days ago, the the future, that the system operator was changed into public hands. So National Grid owned the energy system operator. And on the 1st of October, it became a independent, publicly owned body to secure that future. So I think that's a really good step. It has echoes of what used to be the nationalised industry when I joined. It's smaller in scale and function, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and I'm hopeful some of the people there who've got lots of knowledge, lots of credibility will, put plans together that I think most people can buy into. So I think that's the next step.
And who's on that body then? What sort of people?
So it's really former people from National Grid.
Right. Okay.
But it will now encompass both energy and including gas and electricity. And they'll come up with the plans that, like I said, provide guidance to government, guidance to the regulator, guidance to industry on what needs to be done next. So I think I'm supportive of that. I just hope they, keep pragmatic and speak to engineers as well as policymakers.
Do you think the net zero agenda then is to some degree overtaking the energy security issue? We're also focused on the net zero agenda, that energy security is being. For people listening, that you've got what's called a trilemma. So you've got things pulling in three different directions. You've got green and, net zero and, low carbon. So that's one direction. Then you've got price. People really don't want to pay a lot of money for electricity and gas. They want it because there's no branding. It's not like you're going to go and buying a Costa coffee or a Starbucks, right? It's pretty plain, power and gas, right? So price, and then you've got the third element, which is security. Now, I think by security we mean guaranteeing the light.
Yeah, well, most people assume when you switch the switch, the light will come on, right? Yeah. And just to give you a percentage, that the National Grid, so the transmission lines in this country that you see, when you cross the country, they've got a reliability of 99.999%, right? So that's pretty much certain.
Yeah.
So 99.999. So it does fail, but it's very rare. And it typically only fails as a result of a storm or a lightning strike, something like that. And I think of the trilemma, the security piece has been ignored because people have just assumed it's going to be there. They concentrate on price, mainly. And secondly, probably concentrate on green, because everyone really wants to be green if they can. I think it's elastic to price. People who would go, well, I want to be green if it don't cost too much. But if it costs a lot, I'm not too bothered about green. If it's very expensive, then I think green becomes less of a, particularly for those that can't afford it, right?
It's unattainable.
But then my worry is making sure that the security angle is considered more thoroughly, and
because it never gets talked about.
It doesn't normally, and I think if you aggressively try and transition a business and an industry that's very large, then you can have risks along the way, and the risks, if you're not careful, and this is the I mean, we've never had a UK grid blackout. We've had partial bits here and there, but they've been very small. The consequences of a blackout are huge for so many people and so many things. If the transmission network went down, our life as we know it would come to an end pretty quickly. Most people can cope with a power outage, locally for a few hours. But if the whole network went down, then getting the lights back on is quite a process. And the consequences, I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, you're only 3 meals from anarchy.
No, doesn't sound like a good one, though.
No, but really what happened, and this is what leads to looting and leads to law and order breakdown. If you can't feed your family because you don't have enough food or resources, society breaks down pretty fast. So it's actually considered, if you went onto the .gov website and look at the biggest risks in the UK, you would see nuclear fallout, nuclear war, or a nuclear incident. You would see a pandemic, right, which we all know. But right there up the top with those two is a failure of the grid network. So making sure that stays stable, making sure that is robust during this energy transition is what I think a lot of focus needs to.
And do you think that clearly the people who need to are thinking about it, but do you think we need to talk about it a bit more? Because we don't talk about it.
I would like to see more thought and discussion. I would like to see some credible plans just to make sure that that's the case. Now, I'm sure, they've got many. There are teams in the newly formed NESO, which is this National Energy System Operator, working on this all the time. I don't know if they are just not transparent enough, or that kind of thinking needs to be published a bit wider. There are concerns, of course. You've got to make sure that we're in a world today where we've got bad actors that want to do damage and harm to us in the UK, and we've got to be cautious about what is public and what is not. We've got cyber risks. We've got many other things in the energy sector that makes us vulnerable. But I think we need to focus on the security piece more.
So in your role as chief executive of a power station, what influence can you have then? Or are you having? Well,
yeah, at the moment I'm trying to do more in that area by getting some of the thinking. I want to see more work, but I certainly try and read policy, read documents, participate in, the industry consultations to make sure that some of that thinking, is passed through. I mean, I'm hoping some key decision makers actually listen. And I think that the future of this country and its security is paramount. At the moment, we import a huge amount of energy into the UK, and if we were to have a pan-European weather event, a bit, maybe people can remember the Beast from the East that we had a few years ago when it got very cold for a long time. We need an energy system that can deal with those events, which, that people will call that the Black Swan event. It's something that doesn't occur very often, but when it does, it can have a big impact. We need to be ready to deal with those type of things, not just the day-to-day. And, everyone knows, when you're driving around, there are some days you see the wind turbines not turning, and those days will continue. Wind will not blow on certain occasions. We will have short days in winter when the sun doesn't rise for long and it's not windy, and, battery storage will play a part, but for a few hours only, not for days on end. And we need backup plans and resources to deal with those black swan events. So
you're painting a very dark picture.
Well, I think that, some of it is. I think that's just me maybe being prepared. I think, I think we want a future, I think, for this country that's got, reliable, cost-effective energy. I think, when you look at the UK as a emitter, the UK is responsible for about 1% of carbon emissions. What we've done is we've encouraged, with the prices and the way that we've got government policy on carbon emissions, to deindustrialise a lot of our manufacturing to overseas, and it's manufactured in China and then we buy it back in again. Most people, when they buy things, it typically comes from China, and the carbon associated with that is not counted because it's net zero, right? So I see little point in, forcing manufacturing overseas to then bring it back in and not count the carbon. The carbon is being emitted either here or there, but actually by transporting it back, you actually create a bit more. So it doesn't make sense.
It's all in the data, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so one of the questions I normally ask our guests is what keeps you awake at night, but I think I know the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's an analogy, right? Do you remember Grenfell Tower, right?
Yes.
Right, I think most people do. And when you look at the public, inquiry, I saw a map of who was blaming who for the Grenfell Tower, and it was, you've got the regulator blaming the insulating company, the insulating company blaming the standards, the architect blaming each other, government blaming everybody else, and it was just a map of everybody blaming everybody else. Ultimately, the Prime Minister apologised on behalf of the government for allowing it to happen 10 years after, broadly, that policy had been written. What keeps me at night is that entire thing repeating itself. If in 10 years or 5 years' time we have a grid blackout that leads to significant failure and the public inquiry just said everybody blamed everybody else. And I want to see some responsibility for making sure that doesn't happen. So my kind of guide now is to warn people now rather than looking back in 10 years and saying, we tried to tell you.
Yeah.
So I want to see pragmatic approach.
And what is the future for you then in terms of your career? I know you've got a big birthday coming up this month. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
So are we allowed to talk about the R word?
Yes, yeah. So I'm planning to have a bit more freedom from the normal day-to-day activities by being in the office and leading a business. So I've decided to retire next year. Retire fully is probably a bit strong. I think I'd like to stay engaged with the energy sector. I've been in it I've been in it then for 44 years. I think I can still add a voice of pragmatism and reason. Where and how I do that remains to be seen.
You're clearly passionate about it as well as having the knowledge.
I care.
You care a lot. Yeah.
I do care about it. Yeah. But I think ultimately I like a bit more freedom as well, to do some of the things I like to do.
Which is what?
I like to travel, I like to work out, I like to, spend a bit of time, watching my younger kids play sports and going and doing the sport activities that, I wish I'd had the freedom to do when you're not working 40, 50 hours a week. A bit of life balance, but also try and use a bit of the experience I've gained over the years in giving back a little bit. And that really comes back to, the apprenticeships and the training and the opportunities for younger people. We at Triton Power, we've had an apprenticeship program running for 20 years now. In fact, one of the shift managers is a former apprentice. We've got probably about 30% of the staff at the power plant former apprentices.
Which is a great statistic.
This year we took on our biggest number, which we took 7 apprentices on this year. And I think that's where I'd like to see more companies growing their own talent. So I was reading an article recently about the value of a degree. What is the value of a degree these days? Well, I think if you were going to study computer science or studying, electrical engineering on the basis we've got an energy transition coming, they're ultimately going to be doing much better than some degrees that probably industry does not need. So I would like to see a bit more focus on education, on what industry needs. But then I think there's a massive advantage of an apprenticeship program for companies. And, I'm sure there are strings to be pulled to encourage a bit more of that.
Yeah. I think apprenticeships have the perception of apprenticeships has improved over the years. And I mean, you're a great example of a successful apprentice in terms of the career.
Yeah.
So I think people aren't so dismissive of apprenticeships as they used to be back in the day.
Yeah, I think it's changing. I think it's just started to change recently, which is a great thing.
It's a brilliant thing. Yeah.
I think you get people grounded.
You grow
and
them. Like you use the expression.
They understand the business
talent.
from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And I think that there's like every organisation, big organisation, there's politics at play. You need to understand how people behave and react. But I think if you come in as an apprentice and you've worked your time and you've done most of the jobs, people can believe and trust in you. I mean, every time we get new guys on site, I have a big safety brief every time we start an outage off, where I talk to people about, what we will tolerate and what we won't and the standards we expect. And, in the main, I think because you've been there, you've lived it, you've done it, people actually respect it. So
you've got the credibility.
Makes a difference.
Thinking back over your 40 plus years, congratulations, a very successful career. Is there anything you would do differently looking back? Hindsight's always a great thing, right? I don't think so. I've enjoyed it, There's been tough times, but I do say this to people. I think you've got to have a bit of tough in your life, because you can't appreciate the good unless you've had some bad. I think that's how you recognise the differences. I don't believe in, you can just have an easy ride anywhere. I think the more energy, effort you put into stuff, the more rewarding it feels in the end. And resilience is so important. I do worry that we're bringing up our children not to be resilient at the moment.
I do. I think partly that's, I think it's them. I think it's social media to some extent. I actually think parenting as well. I think a lot of parents are just disengaged. I don't know whether it's, they're too engaged in the phones and not giving the kids the right experiences, or they just trip out. I don't know what it is. But I would like to see a lot more engagement from kids, from parents, really. But yeah, resilience is one of my favourite words. It is. Yeah.
I did not know that. Well, thank you. It's been fascinating talking to you. Congratulations on a very successful career.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing what you move on to. I can feel your passion about the future of the power industry. So I hope. Well, I know you're going to play a big part in that going forward, and I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
And thanks again just for your time this morning and coming in to see us.
You're welcome.
I've enjoyed our chat.
Thank you for having me.
So it's tradition that I have a question that our previous guest has left, and it was a he, didn't know he was leaving it for. So I'm now going to ask you that question, if I may. Okay. Put you on the spot.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with you, because obviously he didn't know he was leaving it for you. If you had been given £10,000 as a teenager, what would you have done with it?
As a teenager, I would have spent it in the pub and going on holiday.
10 grand in there.
I remember saying, I used to waste every single penny I had back in those days.
So, okay, let's twist the question. So if one of your children, you came across £10,000, let's just say,
what would
legally,
I do? What would
you hope they would do with it?
Wealth is created over long-term investing. And clearly, I would encourage them as best I could to put a long-term investment plan in place into a pension. But that's me knowing now what I know now. As a teenager, I'd have just wasted every penny without a second thought.
Not wasted, you'd have enjoyed it.
Well, I was earning. I remember earning. I finished my apprenticeship. My first salary. My first weekly was a weekly wage. I used to get paid in cash. Was £3.40 a week.
It wasn't. At least it wasn't shillings and pence.
When I got into year 4, it was like something like £44 a week. Because like I said, weekly paid. And then I finished my apprenticeship and I got a job and it went up to 150. And my dad used to say, my mum used to say, you need to save some of that money. You need to save some of that money. This is me 21 years old. And I used to waste it all in the pub.
Yeah.
Every single penny.
But you were having a good time.
I was. I used to go on holiday, but funny thing is, I bought my first house. My mum jokes about this. I bought my first house at 21. And I bought it without even going upstairs. I walked in the front door, walked to the back, walked to the front, said, yeah, I'll have it, and I walked out again. Crazy.
But
She reminds me of it.
You can't be spending all your money in the pub if you could afford to buy a house.
Well, I think that was, I think my dad decided he'd had enough, and he put my weekly board and lodgings for staying at home.
It was cheaper to go and buy a house.
Well, I think it was his way of saying I'm going to have to do something. So he put my weekly board up to £20 a week. This was in 1985.
And you were earning what?
And I was earning about
Roughly.
100, right? So clearly I decided I'm not giving my money to my dad. I might as well buy an house.
Yeah,
Only then did I realise it costs a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But it was the right thing
does.
to do at the time, yeah.
And that independence. Anyway, well, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
Right, good. Thank you again. Thanks for your time.
Thank
It's
you.
been great talking to you. And thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, please do so via our normal social media channels. And I look forward to talking to you again next month. Until then, bye-bye.